Okay, thanks very much for coming back on time. We're going to start the second half of the session. I just want to say thank you for everybody that participated in buying a lunch and having a go, because we're just trying out this provider and trying a new model of ticketing for Dirk so that we reduce waste. There were 13 people that didn't come today, so all those boxes got donated, so yay. And thanks for everyone that asked me about the recycling, because that's something that we haven't quite worked out with that, because I wasn't sure what we were getting. But next time we do that, I'll consider how we can best recycle those kind of things. I'll hand over to you.
Great, thank you very much. And thank you, Bianca, for organising lunch and writing everyone's name on the lunch boxes, which was pretty good. Right, so I'm going to talk about some work that Sarah and I have been doing together recently with GoPros, which, as I was just explaining to Harriet, are a bit of a kind of experimental, kind of playing with the technology to see what we can do with them. So this is sort of in response to the increasing use in social science research to use body-mounted action cameras. As I'm sure it's like calling Coke a fizzy drink or something, but GoPros basically is what we're talking about. I've got one here. So in this talk, we're going to explore the possibilities that such technologies offer us for encountering and analyzing other people's experiences of the world, and, as it turns out, our own. So in doing so, we focus very much on the notion of the video trace, which is something that Sarah's written about and that we've also written about together. So that is the idea that cameras such as GoPros do not so much offer us the possibility to capture the world as it appears in front of the camera lens, but instead to record a trace through the world, as created by our movements in specific environmental, sensory, and affective configurations. So we're going to use this approach to examine what we might learn from making such recordings, how the possibility of empathetic co-creation, of sensory knowledge between research participants, and potential audiences might emerge through and with these technologies. So as such, we do not treat video as a record of experience, so much as we foreground its capacity to constitute new knowledge by creating a particular trace that enables a process of reflection, discussion, and understanding. So this process, which I'll unpack through the examples, uses the recording as a springboard instead for knowledge making, rather than treating it as capturing something that already exists. So Paolo touched on very similar themes in his talk just before lunch. So we're going to do this by talking through a couple of recent examples, a couple of recent projects in which we and other research participants use the GoPro cameras to record our movements in a range of environments, in our case, public urban environments. We're going to argue that this requires us to acknowledge video not simply as a representational medium, but as a trace to the world that we move and learn with. As such, it offers us particular ways to engage video as a research technology beyond the assumption that, as I said, it might objectively capture what lies in its range. Right, so cameras on our bodies. So there's an emerging social science literature focusing on first-person perspective cameras. So Paolo mentioned life logging cameras, which are little ones like little tiny ones you can wear on you. This is the GoPro that I use and that the research participants used, and I wore it on a backpack strap right here on my shoulder. And Chris, who I'll introduce in a moment, wore it on his helmet when he was cycling around. So these capture a constant stream of images and sound from these sort of body-mounted, small body-mounted, or indeed animal body-mounted, as we saw in Larissa's presentation perspective. So they provide a visual and oral perspective on the user experience. They can be mounted in multiple ways. You often see them used to look back at the face of the person who might be using them, or to look out, as I use it, as I'll show you later on my backpack. So today, as I talk through these examples, I want to refigure the definition and potential of GoPro cameras for research and explore the nature of the knowledge and the experience that can be produced, interpreted, and communicated to others through their use, by way of examples by two recent research projects. Right, so first, just a little bit on the video trace. And these are stills from a project. It was actually a project on automated light that Sarah and I did over the winter. These are stills from one of our participants who, again, as I said, I'll introduce in a moment. But we're working here with the notion of the video trace, which refers to the idea that to record with a video camera is not simply to capture what can be seen in front of the camera, but it refers to situations where people are involved in holding or otherwise guiding a video camera with their bodies. The camera thus recording a trace of the route that was taken through the world and the environment through which it moves by the camera, but also by the body of the person holding it. The trace therefore stands for the route of movement through the environment, the terrain encountered, the ground underfoot even as you see people's bodies move, the air, the weather that the camera moves through, and all the other experiential but not always visible elements of the environment that converge to constitute the particular conditions through which the video recording was produced. So I was thinking back here about Brad's configuration of the nephosphere and the notion of moving through air as being part of what drones are doing. So similarly, these body-mounted cameras accompany the body as it moves through these conditions. So by acknowledging the video trace as the outcome of these complex configurations of things and processes, rather than simply an objective or an observationally correct or accurate recording of what happened, this enables us to understand the GoPro and its affordances in new ways. It reminds us it's not just an observational technology, perhaps not even an observational technology. It is not an objective view of the world as experienced by another person. Rather, viewing it, working with it, editing it, invites the researcher to take a new route of movement through the world accompanied by the recording, and an empathetic sensibility or disposition to comprehending the experiences that might emerge from the configuration of things, objects, surroundings, environments, weather, etc., that led to the making of the recording. And indeed, as I'll talk about, the process of working with the trace subsequent to its creation. So this empathy applies both to a keenness to collaborate with participants to understand their experiences, as well as to reflect on and understand what we might learn from our own experiences of using them. Okay, so here we have, as I said, some of Chris's stills from some of Chris's clips. So he produced a series of short video clips as part of a research project late last year or early this year. We asked participants to record their routes home through the city with particular attention to how they experience automated forms of urban life. So this was about automation, sort of public and urban automation. So Chris was one of the participants with whom Sarah did the follow-up interview, viewing the clips and discussing the experiences. Chris had chosen, now, despite the fact that we'd asked him to use a still camera to take photographs of automated light, he'd chosen to use a GoPro because he really wanted to capture movement, and he felt this was the most appropriate way to think through his bike ride home. So he'd recorded and edited short clips, so not a continuous recording. He gave us a series of about 10 little clips as a way to communicate the experience of the ride and how automated lighting figured in this. He'd elected to record his departure from the building where he worked, which is this very building where we are. And in the first clip that I'll show you, he talks about the lights on his bike and how he sort of organized them and got them ready for his ride.
And then I think the next clip is me starting to put the lights onto my bike, so checking if they work. These didn't quite turn up. You can see one of them flashing.
Oh yeah.
Here. They're not quite that shot, but yeah, sort of turning them on to check that they're working. Those are kind of, I guess, really critical in terms of when you're cycling. That's the way that you're visible.
Mm-hmm.
And often the flashing patterns are designed in such a way that they're to capture attention. So often they're not a regular on, off. They're actually different kinds of pulses. And the rear light I have has 3 lights and then one super bright one, and they sort of do a different kind of pattern. So that you're sort of you're kind of, I guess, to capture the attention of someone who's maybe not paying attention.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm sorry if the volume was down on that as we sort of fiddle around up here. But Chris explained how he used the lights, the patterns that they created, and the possibility that they might protect him from inattentive drivers. And the clips also gave Sarah a means to investigate these things and find out, get a much richer and deeper perspective on his experience. Sarah invited him to explain what he had recorded and why, and in so doing he was able to reveal the much wider considerations related to his ride, such as the potentially protective qualities of the lights and his relationships to other road users. Later in the interview, Chris explained the contingencies that determined his ride home.
How my route home would change based on what else was happening, particularly in terms of so sometimes I would go straight ahead there, but because I'm familiar with the cycles of the lights, and I know if I'm there as a cyclist in that right turning lane, it won't trigger a right turning arrow. I'm not heavy enough. So there needs to be a car in that lane, and then I can make a right turn there. Otherwise I'm waiting and will never cycle over. But this one is one where, so I was cycling here, this light was red. Ordinarily I'd go straight ahead, but actually I can also do a slightly sneaky thing across here, knowing that all most cars are stopped. And then, so my route sort of changes based on these kinds of things.
Now, I can reassure you that Chris did sign a consent form for us to show this footage in public, so any of his sneaky light jumping activities have been authorized to show you, and I know some of you know him. But the reason we chose to talk about this is because it demonstrates how he has an immediate imagination of the decisions he's going to make, how he adapts, how his behaviors emerge, how his decision-making is contingent on this assemblage of the weight of his body on the road, which isn't enough to trigger the light, so then he waits for a car to come along. If it's red, he turns, and if it's not red, then he has to wait. And so you get this much, much richer and complex picture about not only what he's doing, but the decisions he's making as he's moving through that environment, and how he imagines the immediate sort of consequences of those decisions. So later again in the interview, Chris points out that it's not just these more technological configurations that are decisive in relation to the routes that he takes, but that it also depends on his mood. So he says, if I've had a really busy day and I really need some headspace, then I won't go on a really busy road, which is, I'm sure an experience that's common for a lot of us. So thus the video trace allows us to unpack, discuss, and constitute a much richer experience of urban cycling that draws in what Chris was thinking about, the contingency of his decision-making, the entanglement of cycling with other movements and activities in his day, and the role that cycling might play in helping him decompress after a busy day, and transition into a more relaxed state of being at home when he gets there. So in addition to being obviously a great tool in terms of unpacking this whole sort of experiential world that Chris is having around these activities, as observational documents, the recordings also offered us a way to empathize with the experience of cycling through the city, seeing familiar landmarks and familiar intersections. So this intersection, for example, is on my way home as well, so I recognized it instantly. So as Sarah viewed Chris's GoPro video clips of his bike ride home from work through Melbourne, she described herself as situating herself as the rider, seeking to encounter some of the experience of riding through the city herself. She used her own experience of cycling, as indeed did I when I watched these clips as well, of cycling through urban nighttime environments to achieve this, recalling past sensations and emotions, imagining what it must have felt like to cross a large intersection like that, the hazards that you might encounter, including in Melbourne, the devilish tram tracks, not on this route, but that your bike can get stuck in and then you can fall over. Many people have had this experience. What it feels like to cycle at night, and indeed drawing on our own experiences to imagine Chris' experience. So thus Chris's clips felt simultaneously mundane and solemn, as they recorded a series of moments usually experienced alone in the midst of traffic and other travelers, but became increasingly solitary as he rode out of the busy city center area and towards his home. They offered us a way to imagine his encounter with his environment as he moved through it, but also invites us to encounter it through our own experience of the video. So that is, we could not have hoped to know what it felt like to be Chris on the basis of viewing the video, but rather we can use it to seek to view the world from a recording that was closely associated with his embodied experience, and from this perspective, develop an empathetic viewing position. So the video recording should not, however, be seen as a device that can take us with the viewer back somehow in time to his experience of the actual route, but rather a recording with which we can move forward in our own experience through its viewing. So in this sense, GoPro recordings are not secondary ways to access other people's direct experience of the world or views of the world, but rather they're recordings of a trace through the world with which we move forward in our own thinking and knowing each time we experience them. These ways of engaging with another person's experience form layers of the research encounter, the final layer being our face-to-face encounter with the video recording itself. So the work here enabled us as researchers and Chris as participant together to encounter a trace that had been made through the environment during particular moments and through particular configurations, and to then together move forward in our shared experience of this, co-constituting new knowledge together as we discussed and considered the video trace. So we also did a few little experiments, a few little autoethnographic experiments, and this next clip is drawn from some work that Edgar and I did together at a public commemorative ceremony at the Anzac Day dawn service. Was that this year? This year or last year? This year, yeah. So the video trace in this case helped prompt new ways of understanding the first-hand experience of our own surroundings. So I wore a GoPro during my attendance at the dawn service, using it as a means to try to understand and reflect on my own sensory experience of the gathering and its relationship to representation and narrative. So my process of watching back and considering the footage was similar to Sarah's interview with Chris that treated the video trace as an episode of movement through the particular environment. So as with Chris, watching and considering this recorded trace revealed new insights about the event, highlighting sensory and mobile aspects that perhaps I hadn't really noticed the first time around. So in this way, the GoPro video helped to, as Vanini and Stewart say, generate evocative and effective impressions of places through a process of playback, reflection, and discussion that occurred after the recordings were actually made. In part, this is because these recordings allowed me to revisit my experiences, noticing new things or connecting sensorial impressions in new ways. Okay. Are you from Melbourne? Do you live in Melbourne? See you later. Nice chatting with you.
Can you explain a little bit the answer concept?
I can.
By taking advice from shrine guards and shrine officials, you'll soon be invited to enter the sanctuary to lay a poppy. Remember to take movement of the class, please, in the education centre and galleries open to the public. In addition to the permanent displays in the galleries, including little illuminating photo, standing photo, this is the list of demonstrations. And thank you, one and all, for your attendance at 2015 Anzac Day dawn service. Good morning.
Okay, so this clip is a sort of précis of the event, from the snatches of conversation with the young woman I met walking to the ceremony and a little bit of my conversation with Edgar, to a wander through the crowd at the end. The camera, as you can see, moves and shifts with my body, and I wasn't even aware how much my shoulders move as I sort of walk along. It records the sound of my camera and the rustle of my clothes, and at one point, right towards the end there's the loud, it was actually quite loud, although you couldn't really hear it, the fleeting chirping sound of a flock of birds that flew over. You saw some people in the video kind of look up to try to take in what the sound was. This blended with the other noises of the speaker giving us final instruction, of quiet applause at the end of the ceremony, and a few people looking up at the sky. This sound, in particular, worked to locate the experience in the park setting of the Shrine of Remembrance here in Melbourne, and at dawn when birds are very active, signaling the events in placement and timing. So working with the video trace after recording it helped me think about what I had noticed and not noticed, and reflect on its role in shaping the feel and atmosphere of the event for me as a participant. So the changing lights, the sound was one thing that I find really valuable about making these kinds of recordings. The changing light condition was another aspect of the event that the video trace unmasked for me. The footage, the process of editing it, showed how the light changed from very dark, so dark that you can barely discern what's going on around you, to almost full daylight by the end of the clip. The change in the sky was so gradual as to not be consciously noticeable at any given moment, and so thus the dawning light as a changing feature of the event and my ability to see, move around confidently and take photographs was best revealed subsequently by means of a video trace. Finally, the footage showed me on the move, and how this moving around the space was a prevalent aspect of my attendance at the event. From my arrival at the site to walking around to take photographs, lifting my arms, the rhythm of my steps, and the glances of other people as I moved past them, all hint of the presence of my body in the space and its relationship to its surroundings. Thus the video trace reveals my body, even though you can't see it in the footage, and it reveals it as mobile and interacting with my surroundings and the human and non-human elements in it. Indeed, as Paolo, in Edgar's book, which we launched last night, says of the GoPro, it allows us to engage with the materiality of life amidst the most diverse range of situations closing by melding with the body of the user, the distance between the image and the sensorial texture of everyday life. So in my account, the sensorial texture was additionally revealed through the process of watching back and editing the footage, and then by writing about the event by means of the video trace. So just a couple of comments to finish up. So our use of the GoPro in these kinds of experiments, I guess, has provided a means to consider participants' trace through the world as a shareable one that can be employed to create new ways of understanding these experiences. This includes a process of reflection and discussion that in our first example drew together Chris, Sarah, the video footage, and the process of interviewing into their encounter. The trace engendered a mode of empathetic viewing that meant that Sarah could engage with Chris's footage based on her own experiences of cycling, its hazards and pleasures. Here, the intimacy of the bicycle-mounted camera also provided a way of understanding Chris's experience that found an echo in her own. Finally, the video trace opened a new perspective on an event that was related but distinct from my own memory of it in that last clip. Attached to and echoing my own body, the video trace was intimate but separate from my own memories. As I worked with and on the trace, it yielded new insights that exceeded what I could have reached with other methods. Thanks. Okay. Any questions?
Do you make any attempt to start again? Do you make any attempt to link what the individual's going through and seeing to what might be a trace from like a GPS? It might be interesting to look at a map of the city, what their path was, and how that relates to what they actually experienced. Do you do that at the moment?
Look, I'm not doing that at the moment. I mean, you know, other people do that. I think personally it's not where the direction that I really want to go with this next, because I really like the kind of experiential perspective, this perspective, rather than the top-down, right? I really like, well, maps aren't always top-down, of course, but I really like the moving through, you know, the tracing through, the wayfinding through experience, the way that allows you to think about and think through contingency and emergence and sort of the immediate future and the immediate past. I really enjoy that aspect of what the video trace does. So for me, the map pulls away from that. I mean, that's not necessarily the case for everybody, but the map pulls away from that. So I'm not really thinking about this in terms of mapping as such, I suppose. So maybe that will come later. But at the moment, it's about empathy and about reworking of the trace and what that process can do, rather than sort of trying to put it onto a map, a different kind of spatial rendering.
Yeah, from self-introspection, I'm always amazed when I'm somewhere new. You sort of meander in a new city, and it's really interesting. Where when you're in your own environment, you're always busy and going straight, and you don't see as many interesting things. And that's self-introspection. I don't actually recall it, but fitting that to what a local person or a non-local person does are really interesting questions.
Thanks, Adrian.
All right, thanks a lot. I mean, I think it's brilliant that you really engage with it systematically as tool for conducting research. I was wondering whether what direction we should take. It kind of links up also to what we were discussing this morning with drones, I mean, because the GoPro has also very particular set of optics, a particular lens. So in a way, when we look at GoPros, you get the feeling that it's really like also the position for which they film. I mean, they take us a bit like drones to places where we haven't been, paradoxically, because it's straight on our body.
Yeah.
And from what you were saying, what I get to think about is the extent to which actually it's not about seeing things differently, but about seeing different things, as McDougall said.
Yeah, and hearing different things.
And hearing different things,
Yeah.
So is that the kind of direction? Could you kind of tell us a bit more of, where this takes you in terms of what would be the next step for engaging with it methodologically? Because this was so rich, and I just
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I think I'll have to write and think about this a bit more. And with Sarah, this is work we're doing collaboratively. I mean, one of the things that I was interested in is you talk about what it can show you from where it is on your body. Sound, when I first started playing with these, I realized, like we were talking about life-locking cameras before, I mean, they don't give you sound. And sound is such an important part of atmosphere and how we have kind of effective moments in our kind of movement through the world. That's one of the things I like about GoPros. I've made this decision to wear it on my shoulder, and I just sort of wanted to talk this through because in this situation, it's very, very dark, and it's this sort of solemn kind of ceremony, and also it's too self-conscious to wear it on a helmet or on my head or something like this. So I tried to do it as inconspicuously as possible. But in some of the trace, because it's got a flashing red light on it, which I think I could turn off, but I couldn't figure out how to do that. There's got this flashing red light. You probably don't do this like this. But I was standing behind those ambulance workers, and so you get this like flash up the backs of their reflective jackets, and so these people kind of spring, into light. And these were things that at the time I wasn't sort of noticing at all because my eye wasn't perceiving the light because I was sort of looking at different things. So I think that there are things, there's lots more footage to think about and to work through. I mean, for me, what's interesting about this is the kinds of affective intensities that it might unmask, or that it might invoke as you watch back. So it's not just a process of being there and thinking about how you felt, but it's a process of reflecting and thinking back on. And even the process of editing the film, which is not something I've done very much of, was a thinking process and a reimagining and reconfiguring the trace subsequently. That's something I'm really interested in doing more work on. Is now we've got all this material, raw material, then how do you think through the process of working that, which is sort of where you get to kind of some of what Jennifer's doing, with your collaborators, working with and working on, and then how does that sort of take your thinking forward about affect and about atmosphere, which is something that I'm interested in. Yeah.
So I really like the notion of the trace, especially in those night shots, because there is something about the blurred lights and the smeared vision, and that made me, of course, think straight away of Leviathan.
Yeah. Yes. Right.
Which a film made basically with GoPro cameras on fishermen's bodies on the end of sticks crawling into fishing nets. But the project of that film is not, well, it's an extension maybe of empathetic viewing or but it's also definitely disorientating. You know, as Castaigne Taylor says, it's a film about being at sea in all its in a really sensorily intensified way. So I wonder then if in this work too, if empathetic viewing, yes, but if in fact the GoPro can take you into disorientations that might then enable you to see or experience or respond to or figure the world differently.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. It's Sarah was just waiting. I don't know if that made you want to answer a question or ask a question.
I was going to ask something.
Oh, okay. Well, but yes, absolutely. And using them differently, sort of mounting them differently, like not as part of the study we did with Chris, but another study we did on cycling, on cycle commuting. We had all this footage, and I found that, and these were helmet mounted. And so we asked people to record their cycle commutes, and then sort of we interviewed them, subsequently about this. It was about self-tracking and commuting. But there was one woman in particular, and as she went along the bike path next to the river, she'd go through these narrow kind of, the fences would sort of come in like this, and the camera distorted. She looked at that, as we watched the footage together, she looked at that and said, oh, it doesn't feel as narrow as it looks. And there were times when I was watching it, I had the headphones on, I was kind of going like this, when you sort of duck down, because there's this sort of thing that she's, the bridge that she's coming up to. So that empathy extended even to, kind of physical reactions to watching other people's footage that they had recorded with their own bodies. So yes, it does open the possibility of very different and very disorienting kinds of experiences, in part through through some of the kind of particular affordances of this technology, which is to, you can set it for different more fisheye, less fisheye, and stuff like that. So yeah, it does. It absolutely opens that up. And then what does that do to empathy and to affect, right? And to how we sort of are having a kind of embodied experience that somehow is sort of an echo, or somehow goes alongside the experience of the other person.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to say, it's wonderful to look at. I really enjoyed looking at it, and it made me think about the idea of accidental and incidental aesthetics. And so the fact that you're looking at something
right
after the experience, as you've said, and there are things that you pick up on. When you're talking about getting sort of an output together in the end, and what you're going to do, how much will aesthetics play a part of it, do you think, in your actually sort of getting to an outcome? And how much will be or is it more on the side of the shared and the individual experience?
Yeah, look, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question, actually. I mean, I suppose I'm not thinking about aesthetics as I'm doing that work afterwards. It's not something I had to teach myself to use editing software to put these clips together. So, that which wasn't particularly hard, but which is a very much something that I'm not sort of practiced at. And I guess when I think about things that I'm more practiced at, like writing, then you are trying to adopt a certain aesthetic kind of stance, right? You're just trying to sort of prosify in a sort of particular way. I think I'll have to sort of think about that, because I'm not to that point yet. Like, I'm not skilled enough to feel in control of that yet. But maybe not being in control of it is part of what emerges and what's kind of engaging. Yeah. I don't know, but they are kind of fascinating to, this blurred sort of qualities. That's quite fascinating. All right, I think there's
one last question, and then
yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for a really interesting paper. I really appreciated the way that you spoke about your body and the technology as a kind of a hybrid instrument. And I think I'm going to need to think more about that. But I think one of the things that's coming back to me again and again through the paper and also through these questions is where your use of trace comes from, even in the first instance. It feels like it's drawing from a body of literature that I'm not familiar with. So I wonder if you could speak to your choice of that as a framing for your work here.
Yeah, I don't know if Sarah might want to speak to that. of what traces. I mean, for me, it's about indoor, and it's about wayfinding and lines through surroundings and through environments. I don't know if you want to add to that, but that's my starting point with this. Where does the trace come from, and how
Yeah.
do we trace?
Maybe.
I think for me the trace comes out of earlier work that I've done as well, trying to think about, and this is what I was going to follow up on earlier as well, is about the idea of video as being something that doesn't necessarily have to be about what we're recording in front of the camera, but actually being about a record of a trace through the world. So it's about the trace we make through the environment, through the air, etc., as we walk through the world or move through the world with video. And that's about not necessarily about what's in front of the camera, that's about what's around us. And it's also about what David McDougall writes about what we see in the footage being about the experience and the way in which the person who's making the film is actually placed or situated in the world. So, and that's the other comment I was going to make about that was also reflecting on the idea that, and with GoPro in particular, which goes back to the question about the aesthetics, I found GoPro really hard to watch because, the framing is unconventional. The way the camera moves around makes me feel nauseous when I watch other people's GoPro footage. I mean, it's difficult footage, difficult images. And in that sense, it's not necessarily always about what's in the image. It's actually what you see in the image, it's what you see with the image. And so when we were doing the GoPro cycling project that Shanti mentioned later, what was really interesting about that is that it kind of created a way to collaborate also across the research team. And particularly, when Shanti was talking about when the woman who was going under the bridge, she was the same woman who looked like she was going to fall in the river, didn't she, at one point, you know? And when I watched it, I was like, I stopped, I was with Shanti, and I stopped and I said, she's going to fall in, I know she's going to fall in, she didn't. And you'd experienced something similar, hadn't you? And in fact, in the interview, she said, oh no, I wasn't that close really, at all. So, but being able to actually share those embodied experiences across the research team, even though what we thought we saw in the camera wasn't her experience, it was actually enabled us to find out more about her experience because it made us answer those questions. So, and I think, but very often when working with video, it's not always what's in the image. It's what you learn by engaging with the image or engaging with the world or other people's experience through the image. So the idea that video directly records the things that we're going to analyse, which is part of other disciplines, doesn't really feel so much part of what I do, although it's inevitably, it is still part of it in some ways.
Thank you.